Rebecca Winters pressed her back flat against the wall outside William Ashford's study, one hand resting soft and trembling against her stomach, where 6 weeks of secret had been quietly growing. She had not meant to stop. She had not meant to listen. But his voice came through that heavy oak door like a sentence already decided, low, certain, and cold as deep winter. "I never loved her anyway." 5 words. That was all it took. Rebecca's hand dropped from her belly. Her knees went soft beneath her, and every fragile thing she had allowed herself to believe came undone on that floor without a sound. If you want to follow Rebecca's story from the very beginning, all the way through the heartbreak, the choices, and what she finally does with those 5 words, subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single part. And leave the name of your city down in the comments. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to where it all started. The night Rebecca Winters decided she would rather disappear than be seen, the Beaumont Gala was in full force. She had tucked herself behind a large column near the far end of the main hall, close enough to the long table of gardenias and magnolia arrangements that their scent was almost suffocating. She kept her chin up. She kept her shoulders square. Those were the 2 things her mother had drilled into her from childhood. Chin up, shoulders square, never let them see you flinch. And she held on to them now, the way a drowning woman holds on to a piece of driftwood. "Did you hear about the Winters family?" a woman's voice said, sharp and low, just behind the nearest arrangement. "Charles Winters lost everything, every last cent. The plantation's mortgaged to the ceiling, and the creditors have already started circling." Rebecca did not move. "Everything?" said a second voice, younger, hungry for the detail. "Everything. He made some terrible investments up in Virginia. Land that turned out to be worthless swamp. And now the whole family's drowning in it. Poor Rebecca." A pause, and then the warmth drained right out of those 2 words. She used to be such a fine catch. Used to be. Rebecca kept her eyes fixed on the middle distance and breathed through her nose, slow and even. She was 24 years old. She had attended this gala every summer since she was 16, and every summer she had worn her best dress and smiled at the right people and pretended the world was exactly what it appeared to be from the outside. Tonight, her best dress had a small mend near the left cuff that she had sewn herself because they could no longer afford the seamstress. Tonight, her mother was home with a headache that had nothing to do with her health and everything to do with the letter from the bank that had arrived that morning. Rebecca. She turned. Margaret Holloway stood 3 feet away, all silk and composed sympathy, 2 glasses of punch in her hand. She was older by about 15 years, sharp-eyed and well-meaning in the particular way that made well-meaning feel like a blade. "Margaret," Rebecca said, "you look lovely. And you look like you're trying to become part of the wallpaper." Margaret pressed one of the glasses into her hand. "Come now. You can't hide behind those flowers all evening." "I'm not hiding. I'm appreciating the arrangements." Margaret looked at her over the rim of her glass. "Your mother didn't come tonight." "She's unwell." "Is she?" It was not a question. Margaret set her glass down on the nearest table and folded her hands in front of her with the practiced calm of a woman who had delivered difficult news before and expected to again. "Rebecca, I'm going to say something, and I want you to hear it as kindly as it is meant." Rebecca felt her shoulders pull back on instinct. "All right, people are talking, and not quietly." Margaret kept her voice low, her eyes moving once across the room before returning. "Your father's situation is not a secret anymore. It may have started as a rumor, but it is now simply the truth. And the truth has a way of traveling in rooms like this one, before a person has had time to decide what to do with it." "I know," Rebecca said. She kept her voice flat and even, She would not give anyone in this room the satisfaction of watching her crack. "I'm aware of our circumstances." "Then you're also aware," Margaret said gently, "that a young woman in your position, with your family's name still carrying weight, even if the accounts don't, has a narrow window before that window closes entirely." Rebecca looked at her. "Are you suggesting I find a husband?" "I'm suggesting," Margaret said, "that you stop hiding behind the gardenias and let yourself be found." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Across the hall, a small orchestra had begun to play, and the room shifted and swelled around it. All that rustling silk and candlelight, and the easy laughter of people who had not yet had a terrible letter from the bank. "Thank you, Margaret," Rebecca said at last. "I'll keep that in mind." She did not go back to the column. She moved instead toward the far side of the hall, threading through knots of conversation, with her chin exactly where her mother had always told her to keep it, and she tried very hard not to think about the letter, about the number in it, about the date by which that number was due. She was almost to the far doors when a hand caught her elbow. Not rough, not urgent, just a firm, deliberate stop. "Miss Winters." The voice was low, and she did not recognize it immediately. She turned. He was tall, taller than most men in the room, and he was watching her with a particular stillness of a man who had decided something and was waiting to see if the other party had caught up yet. His clothes were impeccable. His jaw was set. His eyes were the kind of gray that did not shift or waver, and they were fixed directly on her face, in a way that made Rebecca feel uncomfortably like she was being assessed. "I don't believe we've been introduced," she said. "We haven't," he said. "William Ashford." He did not offer a bow. He did not smile. He simply said his name the way a man states a fact he expects you to already know. "I've been wanting to speak with you." Rebecca studied him for a moment. The name landed with weight. The Ashford family was one of the oldest and wealthiest in the region, their lands stretching well north of the city, their reputation impeccable, and their manner, from everything she had heard, equally cold. "Mr. Ashford," she said carefully, "I'm afraid I'm not sure what we'd have to discuss." "Your father's debt," he said, "and a solution to it." The orchestra played on behind them. Someone laughed too loudly near the punch table. Rebecca felt the floor hold steady beneath her feet only because she made it. "I beg your pardon?" she said. "I don't say things I don't mean, Miss Winters, and I don't waste time on preamble." He turned, and for a moment she thought he was simply going to walk away. But instead, he looked back at her over his shoulder. "There's a room just off the east corridor. Quiet. If you'd like to hear what I have to say, I'll be there in 5 minutes. If you don't, then I'll consider this conversation concluded." And then he walked away, and he did not look back again. Rebecca stood exactly where she was for 10 full seconds. The heat of the room pressed against her. Someone moved past her with a rustle of skirt and a murmured "pardon." Across the hall, she could see Margaret Holloway watching her with an expression that was impossible to read. She told herself she was not going to walk down that corridor. She walked down that corridor. The room was a small sitting parlor, dim and quiet, the noise of the gala muffled behind the closed door. William Ashford was standing near the window with his arms folded, and he turned when she came in, but did not appear surprised. "You came," he said. "You made it sound like a business proposition," Rebecca said. "I find I'm not in a position to dismiss business propositions out of hand these days." Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite amusement, not quite respect, but something adjacent to both. "Then I'll speak plainly." "Please do." "I need a wife," he said. "Not a companion, not a love match. A wife, in the legal and social sense. My grandfather's will has a provision. If I am not married by my 31st birthday, a significant portion of the estate passes to my cousin, whose management of it would be, let us say, less than careful. I have 4 months. Rebecca looked at him steadily. And you chose to come to me. I chose to come to you, he confirmed. Your family's name still carries standing in this city. Your manner is composed, and your reputation is without blemish. You would present well. You say that, she said, as though I'm a piece of furniture you're considering for a room. I say it, he replied, because I am being honest with you, which is more than most men in that hall would offer. She held his gaze. He held hers back. Neither of them looked away. And what would I receive in return? She asked. Your father's debts cleared. All of them. The mortgage on the property settled. A household allowance that would allow your family to live without this particular kind of fear. He let the words sit there for a moment, plain and factual. I don't offer affection, Miss Winters. I won't pretend to. But I can offer security, and I intend to honor what I promise. Rebecca was quiet. She had told herself, walking down that corridor, that she was only going to listen, that she would hear him out and decline politely, and return to the gala and think of some other solution. Because there had to be another solution. Because this was not the kind of thing a woman agreed to in a dim parlor at a summer gala. She thought about her mother's face when the letter had arrived. She thought about her father, who had not left his study in 4 days. You said you're honest, she said, so I'll be honest in return. I do not know you. I do not trust you. And I find this entire proposition deeply uncomfortable. That's reasonable, he said. But my family's situation is not something I have the luxury of being proud about, she continued. And if you are genuinely offering what you say you're offering, I am. Then I would like, she said slowly, to know what the terms would be. In specific. He reached inside his coat and produced a folded piece of paper. He held it out. She took it. She read it twice. Her hands were very steady. She was proud of that. 6 months minimum, she said. 6 months. And the arrangement, she paused, choosing her words. The arrangement remains what it appears on paper. Nothing more. Nothing more, he agreed. If I decide to end it after the stipulated period, the settlement stands regardless. Your family keeps what I've cleared. She looked up from the paper. Why? She said. Why would you agree to those terms? That gives you nothing if I walk away. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not softness exactly, more like the edge of something he had decided not to say. I made my father a promise before he died, he said finally, that I would not let what he built fall apart for want of a name on a document. That's why. Rebecca folded the paper back along its creases. She looked at the door. She thought about the letter and the number in it, and the date. I'll give you my answer by the end of the week, she said. That's acceptable. She moved toward the door and then stopped. She turned back. Mr. Ashford? Miss Winters. If this is to happen, she said, I want to be clear about one thing. I am not a piece of furniture. I will not be treated as one. Whatever else this arrangement is, it will be conducted with basic human decency. On both sides. He looked at her for a moment, and then he gave a short, precise nod. Agreed. She went back out into the corridor, and the sound of the gala came back to her in a rush. The music and the voices and the heat of all those candles. And she walked back through it with her chin exactly where her mother had always told her to keep it. And she did not let a single thing show on her face. 3 days later, she said yes. She told her mother first. Her mother sat very still at the kitchen table and did not speak for a long moment. Rebecca, she said finally. Mama? You don't love him. No, Rebecca said honestly. I don't. But I know him well enough to know he's not a cruel man. And right now, She stopped. She pressed her hands flat on the tabletop. Right now, love is a luxury we cannot afford. Her mother looked at her for a long time. Then she reached across the table and covered Rebecca's hands with her own. Your grandmother would have said the same thing, she said softly. She married your grandfather under worse circumstances than this, and she never once regretted it. I know, Mama. Her mother's hands tightened. Just don't let him make you small. Whatever else happens, don't let him make you small. I won't, Rebecca said. She believed it when she said it. The wedding was quiet. A Thursday morning in late June, the heat already pressing down on the city like a hand. There was a minister. There were 2 witnesses, both of them from William's household. There was no dancing, no feast, no long table of gardenias. Rebecca wore the nicest dress she owned, the blue one, and she stood straight and said what she was supposed to say, and signed where she was supposed to sign. And when it was done, William Ashford looked at her across that small and quiet room and gave her the same short, precise nod he had given her in the parlor. Mrs. Ashford, he said. Mr. Ashford, she replied. And that was that. The house was larger than she had expected, and quieter. The staff was professional and minimal, and they were polite to her in the careful, measured way of people who had been told to be polite and were following instructions. She had her own rooms. William had his. He knocked before he entered, which she had not known to expect, and found she was grateful for. Dinners were the hardest part. They sat at opposite ends of a table meant for 10, and they spoke when they had something to say, and fell silent when they did not, and the silences were long. The Hargrove reception is Friday, he said one evening, 2 weeks in. He did not look up from his plate. I know, she said. It would make sense for us to attend, together. Yes, she agreed. Another silence. Do you enjoy these functions? He asked abruptly. Genuinely. She looked up. He was watching her with that level gray gaze, and she had the impression the question had surprised him as much as it had surprised her. No, she said. Neither do I. She set down her fork. Then why do we go? Because the alternative, he said, is being talked about. People are talking regardless. Yes, he said, but there's a difference between what they say when we're absent and what they say when we're present. Rebecca considered that. That's a very strategic way to think about social life. Everything is strategy, he said, and then, very quietly, almost everything. She did not know what to do with that, so she picked her fork back up, and they finished dinner, and she did not think about it again until much later, lying in her own room in that quiet house, listening to the summer heat press against the windows. She had told her mother she would not let him make her small. She had not accounted for the possibility that he might make her curious. It was at the Hargrove reception, 3 weeks into the marriage, that Rebecca Winters, Rebecca Ashford now, though the name still sat strange in her mouth, first understood that her husband had enemies. She had stepped away from the main group to find the glass of water when she heard 2 men speaking behind a large potted plant in the corner. Their voices were pitched low and careful, the voices of men who believed they were not being overheard. Ashford married the Winters girl, the first man said. Charles Winters' daughter. I heard, the second man said. Convenient timing. Isn't it always? A short, unpleasant laugh. You know what that marriage is worth, legally speaking. If the will's enforced the way old Gerald wrote it, the whole northern parcel still reverts to Dalton. The marriage doesn't change the blood claim. Does Ashford know that? Ashford knows exactly what he wants to know, the first man said. But I've got a lawyer working on it.
By the time he figures out the clause, it'll be too late.
Rebecca stood very still behind the potted plant and did not breathe. "And the girl?" the second man asked. "She's a decoration," the first man said flatly. "Married for paperwork. She won't understand what's happening until it's already done." They moved away. The music swelled. Someone laughed across the room. Rebecca set down her empty glass and walked back out into the candlelight. And her chin was exactly where it was supposed to be. And her shoulders were exactly where they were supposed to be. And her face gave nothing away to anyone watching. But her mind was working very fast, and she was thinking about her husband, who sat across that long table every night, and believed, apparently, that everything was strategy. She wondered if he knew someone else was playing the same game. She wondered if he knew he might already be losing it. And she wondered, with a chill that had nothing to do with the summer heat, whether she, the decoration, the paperwork, the girl who wouldn't understand, was the only one in that room who had just heard the truth. Rebecca did not sleep that night. She lay on top of her covers, with the summer heat pressing flat against the ceiling, and turned those overheard words over and over in her mind. Like stone, she was looking for something beneath. The whole northern parcel still reverts to Dalton. The marriage doesn't change the blood claim. She had not recognized the first voice. The second she thought she might know. A man named Garrett. Something to do with land titles. She had seen him once at her father's office before everything fell apart. But the first voice, the one that said she won't understand until it's already done, that one she could not place, and that was what kept her awake. She was not a fool. She had been raised watching her father conduct business, sitting in corners of rooms where she was meant to be decorative and silent, absorbing more than anyone expected. She understood what a blood claim meant. She understood what a will provision designed to survive a marriage meant. And she understood, with a cold clarity that settled somewhere behind her sternum and refused to move, that if William did not know about this clause, if he had built this entire arrangement on the assumption that the marriage was sufficient, then he was walking towards something he could not see coming. The question was what she was supposed to do with that. She owed him nothing beyond what the contract said. She had been clear about that, and so had he. This was a transaction, a documented exchange of services and stability. And nowhere in that folded paper he had handed her in the parlor did it say anything about protecting him from legal ambush. She could say nothing. She could let it unfold. She could collect her settlement when the 6 months were through and walk back into whatever life remained and tell herself she had fulfilled her end. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum where that cold thing sat. She could not do that. She already knew she could not do that, and she was angry at herself for knowing it. By the time the first gray light came through the curtains, she had made up her mind. She found him in the study before breakfast, which surprised her. She had not known he rose early, and he looked up from a stack of papers when she knocked on the open door, and something in his expression shifted at the sight of her face. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I haven't," she said. She came in without waiting to be invited and closed the door behind her. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting me." He set down his pen. "All right." She told him everything. She kept her voice level and her account precise. What she had heard, where she had been standing, the exact words she could remember. He did not interrupt. He sat very still in the way she had already come to recognize as his way of being very much the opposite of still on the inside. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. "Dalton," he said. It was not a question. "The name was mentioned, yes." He stood up. He walked to the window. He put both hands flat on the sill and stood there with his back to her, and the set of his shoulders said everything his voice was not saying. "Mr. Ashford," she said carefully. "I've known about the clause," he said. He did not turn around. Rebecca stopped. "I've known about it for 8 months," he continued. His voice was controlled and tight. "My grandfather put it in the original will, and it was my father's lawyer who found it 6 months before my father died. The clause states that a legal marriage satisfies the primary inheritance condition, but that if the marriage is shown to be—" He stopped. His hands pressed harder against the sill. "Contractual, in nature, if it can be demonstrated in court that the marriage was entered into as a formal arrangement rather than a genuine union, Dalton's attorney can argue the blood claim supersedes it." The room held its breath. "You knew," Rebecca said. Her voice was very quiet. "I knew." "And you didn't tell me." He turned around then. His face was the same controlled, closed expression it always was, but there was something underneath it that she had not seen before. Something that looked uncomfortably close to guilt. "It didn't change what I was offering you," he said. "The settlement, the cleared debts, none of that was conditional on—" "It changed what I was agreeing to," she said. "That's not a small thing." He looked at her and said nothing. "You told me this arrangement was straightforward," she said. "You told me you were being honest because most men in that room wouldn't be. And you were withholding the single most important piece of information about the legal validity of everything we signed. I didn't want you to feel obligated. I am your wife," she said, and the word came out harder than she intended, raw at the edges. "Whatever else this is, that's what I am on paper, and you owe me the truth of what that paper means." The silence stretched. William Ashford looked at her across his study with those level gray eyes, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked like he did not know what to say next. "You're right," he said finally. Rebecca blinked. She'd expected argument. She had braced for deflection. "You're right," he said again, slower, as though he was testing the shape of the admission. "I should have told you. I made a calculation that keeping it simple was a kindness, and I was wrong." She studied him for a moment. "What does Dalton know?" "Enough." He came back to the desk. He picked up one of the papers, set it down again. "Dalton's been watching the arrangement from the beginning. If he can find a witness to testify that the marriage was entered without genuine—" He stopped. "We would need to appear convincing. That's what I was going to manage over time. Gradually." "Gradually," Rebecca repeated. "Without telling me that was the strategy." "Yes." "That's a spectacular plan," she said flatly. He looked at her sharply, and then something unexpected happened. The corner of his mouth moved. Just barely. Just for a second. "It was not my finest hour of strategic thinking," he said. She did not smile back, but the cold thing behind her sternum shifted, just slightly. "All right," she said. "Then let's be honest with each other for once. What does convincing actually look like?" What it looked like, in practice, was excruciating. They had been playing at civility, the formal dinners, the precise politeness, the careful distance maintained in any room where staff might be present. That, William explained, was no longer sufficient. Dalton's attorney had already been making inquiries. The man Rebecca had overheard at the Hargrove reception. The first voice, the one she hadn't recognized. William identified him as a notary named Crowell, who had done legal work for Dalton's family for 20 years. "He'll be looking for people willing to testify to the nature of our arrangement," William said. "Staff, neighbors, anyone who's observed us together." So we need to be observed differently, Rebecca said. Yes. She thought about this for a moment. How do you feel about holding my hand in public? He looked at her. I beg your pardon? It's a reasonable question. We're discussing what we need to change about how we appear together. I'm being practical. Another of those almost movements at the corner of his mouth. I feel neutral about it, he said. Good. I feel neutral about it too. That's a solid foundation. The Henderson supper was the first test. It was a smaller gathering than the Hargrove reception. 12 people around a table. The kind of close setting where everything was visible and nothing could be performed at a distance. Rebecca wore the green dress, the one her mother had insisted she pack, even though it was too fine for most occasions. And William came to her rooms before they left and stood in the doorway, looking at her with the same precise, assessing gaze she had come to know. You'll do, he said. That is the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me, she said. He did hold her hand on the way in. His hand was warm and dry, and he held hers firmly, not tentatively, the way a man does when he is not thinking about the hand itself, but about what the hand represents. Rebecca told herself that was fine. That was exactly what it was supposed to be. At the table, she was seated beside him rather than across, and that made conversation both easier and harder. Easier because she could speak to him naturally without projecting her voice. Harder because she could feel, in the peripheral way you feel things when you're very aware of them, exactly how much space there was between their shoulders. Mrs. Henderson was asking about their plans for the fall. We've been discussing a visit to my property in the north, William said. Rebecca has expressed interest in seeing the land. Rebecca had expressed no such interest, but she nodded and said, I have. I've heard it's beautiful country. She had, in fact, heard nothing about it at all. You'll love it, Mrs. Henderson said warmly. My husband and I were out that way some years ago. Remarkable. Under the table, William's hand found hers and pressed once, briefly. A small signal. Well done. She pressed back without thinking about it, and then thought about it immediately after and made herself stop. The danger came from Hargrove himself, who sat 2 seats down and had been watching them with an expression Rebecca did not like. He was older, heavy in the jaw, and he had the careful eyes of a man who dealt in other people's information. Ashford, he said, during a lull in the general conversation. I hear Dalton's in the city this week. William did not stiffen. She felt him not stiffen, which was its own kind of thing. Is he? He said pleasantly. Staying at the Meridian. Word is he's got some legal business to attend to. Hargrove's eyes moved briefly to Rebecca and back. Something about property rights. Dalton always has legal business to attend to, William said. It keeps him occupied. How is your harvest looking this year, Hargrove? I heard the northern fields were giving you trouble. The subject changed. The conversation flowed on, but Rebecca kept her hand where it was, near William's on the table, and she watched Hargrove from the corner of her eye for the rest of the meal. And she thought, so Dalton is already here. That was faster than she had expected. Faster than William's expression had told her he had expected. She leaned close to William's ear under the cover of the general noise. He's reporting back, she said quietly. Hargrove. He's watching us. William did not turn his head. I know, he said, equally quiet. Don't look at him. I wasn't looking at him. You were calculating at him. It's nearly the same thing. She pulled back and looked down at her plate to hide the fact that he had, very nearly, made her want to laugh. On the carriage ride home, they were quiet for a few minutes. The city moved past the windows, and the night air came in warm and close, carrying the smell of the river. You handled yourself well tonight, William said. I grew up going to functions like that, Rebecca said. My father used to take me to his business dinners when I was young. He said a woman who knew how to listen in a room was worth 10 of any man who only knew how to talk. Your father was perceptive. He was, she said. A pause. Before he wasn't. She had not meant to say that last part. It came out quiet and unguarded, and she felt William look at her in the dark of the carriage. What happened? He asked. Not prying, just a question, offered flatly and without pressure, the way he offered most things. He trusted someone he shouldn't have, she said. A man who said the investment was sound. The land turned out to be worthless. And by the time he understood that, the money was already gone. She looked out the window. He's a good man. He was just too trusting. There are people in this world who can see that quality in a person, and they aim right for it like an arrow. Yes, William said. Something in his voice had changed, quieter, less controlled. There are. She looked at him. In the dark she could see the line of his jaw, the set of his eyes on the road ahead. Is that what Dalton is? She asked. Someone who aims for that? My father trusted him, William said. They were friends, once, before the inheritance became a question. A pause. Before I understood that some friendships are only friendships as long as no one's money is involved. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, she said. He looked at her. For what? For asking. I know you don't... She stopped. I know you prefer to keep things contained. You didn't overstep, he said. And then, after a moment, with a deliberateness that felt like it cost him something, I don't mind you knowing. The carriage rolled on. The river smell faded. Rebecca turned that sentence over in her mind. I don't mind you knowing, and recognized it for what it was, coming from this particular man. It was not a small thing. She was fairly sure it was the closest thing to vulnerable he knew how to be. It was 10 days later that Dalton made his first open move. He came to the house. Rebecca was in the front sitting room when she heard the knock, and she heard Marcus, the housekeeper, open the door, and she heard the voice that followed, smooth and well-practiced, and too warm in the way of men who have learned to weaponize warmth. I was hoping to call on Mr. Ashford. Is he available? Marcus said he would check. Rebecca set down the letter she had been reading and did not move. William was not home. He had gone to meet his attorney, a meeting she now understood was almost certainly about Dalton. She heard Marcus returning to the door. She heard him begin to say that Mr. Ashford was not in at present. Tell him I can come back, the voice said. And then, a beat lower, Actually, is Mrs. Ashford at home? Rebecca stood up. She heard Marcus hesitate. She was already in the hallway. Mr. Dalton, she said. He was perhaps 50, and he carried the particular confidence of a man who had never seriously considered the possibility that a room might not welcome him. His eyes were pale and sharp, and they assessed her in exactly the same way William's had when they first met. But where William's assessment had felt like calculation, this one felt like measurement, like he was checking whether she was the size he had been told she was. Mrs. Ashford, he said, and smiled. I had hoped to meet you. I'm an old friend of the family. So I've heard, Rebecca said pleasantly. Will you come in? She watched his expression, the smallest flicker. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected to be turned away. I'd be honored, he said. She led him to the front sitting room and sat where she had a clear view of both doors and did not offer him anything to drink. He sat across from her and smiled his careful, warm smile. I won't take up too much of your time, he said. I simply wanted to introduce myself. William and I go back a long way. He's mentioned you, Rebecca said. She had not rehearsed this. She was moving on instinct, and her instinct said, do not let him see you think. Something shifted behind his pale eyes. Has he? He said you were close once, before his father passed. She let that land for a moment. Grief changes relationships, doesn't it? People show you who they really are. His smile held, but did not reach anything deeper. That's very true, he said. Was there something particular you wanted to discuss? She asked. Or was this purely a social call? Social, he said. Entirely. I do like to know the people I may be dealing with. Dealing with, she repeated, keeping her tone pleasant and mild. In a general sense, he said quickly. Of course, she smiled. Well, it's been a pleasure. I'll tell William you called. He stood. She stood. She walked him to the door herself and waited until it was closed behind him, and then stood in the hallway for a full minute, very still, thinking. He had come here to see her, not William. He had come to look at her, to assess whether she was the kind of woman who would understand what was happening, or the kind who wouldn't notice until it was done. That was what this visit was. A test. She recognized it because her father had taught her what to look for. She won't understand until it's already done. She pressed her lips together. Then she went back to the sitting room and sat down and wrote out everything she had observed, everything he had said and the way he had said it, every flicker of his expression, in a small notebook she kept in her desk. When William came home that evening and she told him, he stood in the study doorway and listened without moving. He came here himself, he said, when she finished. Yes, that means he's running out of patience. He came in and sat down and looked at the notes she'd made, and something moved across his face that she still did not have a name for. What did you think of him? I think, she said carefully, that he is exactly the kind of man who mistakes a woman's manners for her limitations. She paused. He doesn't know what he's dealing with. William looked up from the notes. He looked at her for a moment with those gray eyes, and she thought he might say something, but instead he only gave that small, precise nod, the one she had learned to read now, the one that meant more than it showed. No, he said quietly. I don't think he does. And Rebecca did not say anything else, but she felt, somewhere in the vicinity of her sternum, that cold thing had moved again. And what had replaced it was something she did not yet have a name for either, but it was warmer, and it was growing, and she was not entirely sure what she was going to do about that. She kept the notebook. That was the thing she would think about later, how the notebook started as documentation and became something else entirely without her noticing the shift. She recorded everything in it. Dalton's visit, the things Hargrove said at dinner, the name Crowell and what she remembered of his voice. She wrote down dates and times and exact phrases, the way her father had once taught her to keep records of things that mattered. Because a memory you can prove is worth 10 times a memory you can only claim. William found her writing in it one morning at the kitchen table and stopped in the doorway. What is that? He asked. Evidence, she said, or the beginning of it. He came in and sat across from her, and she pushed the notebook to the middle of the table without being asked. He read it slowly. She poured herself a second cup of coffee and waited. You've been doing this since Dalton's visit, he said. Since the Hargrove reception, actually. He looked up. I started the night I heard Crowell, she said. I didn't know yet that it would matter, but I thought, better to have it and not need it. William was quiet for a moment. Then he said, My attorney's name is Garrett Hale. I'd like you to meet with him. All right. He's been working on the clause. But what you've documented here, he tapped the notebook. This is material. Crowell's connection to Dalton, the timing of Hargrove's comments, the visit to this house. He looked at her across the table. This is exactly the kind of pattern a judge needs to see bad faith. I know, Rebecca said. He looked at her again in that way he had, measuring, recalibrating. She had gotten used to it. She had started to understand that it was not coldness, the way she had first read it. It was the expression of a man who had spent a long time trusting very few people, and was still working out, one interaction at a time, whether that number should change. You're not what I expected, he said. You're not what I expected either, she replied. I'll admit, I expected worse. The corner of his mouth moved. That's generous. I'm a generous person, she said. Ask anyone. He stood and picked up his hat from the hook by the door, and he paused there for just a moment with his back to her, and she thought he was about to say something that cost him. Then the moment passed, and he was gone, and she sat alone with her coffee and the notebook, and the morning heat pressing down, and she thought, something is changing. She was not sure yet whether that was a comfort or a warning. The meeting with Garrett Hale happened 4 days later, and it did not go the way she anticipated. Hale was a small, precise man in his late 40s, with the bearing of someone who had spent his entire adult life being underestimated, and had long since made peace with using that as a professional advantage. He shook her hand when William introduced her, looked at her notebook for 11 minutes without speaking, and then looked up at her over his glasses. Mrs. Ashford, he said, how much do you know about property law? Less than I should, she said. Tell me what I need to know. He told her. It took the better part of an hour. The grandfather's will was constructed, she came to understand, like a trap with multiple springs, designed to appear to favor William on the surface, while containing provisions that Dalton's family had almost certainly helped engineer decades ago. The blood clause was only one mechanism. There were two others that Hale had found buried in the language of the estate's foundational documents, and both of them hinged on the same pivot point: the legitimacy of William's marriage. What they're building, Hale said, spreading 3 documents across the desk, is a case for annulment on grounds of contractual entry. If they can prove to a judge's satisfaction that the marriage was a legal mechanism rather than a genuine union, the primary inheritance defense collapses. How much evidence would they need? Rebecca asked. In this jurisdiction, a judge who's sympathetic to Dalton and 2 credible witnesses. Hale looked at her steadily. Which means the question is not just what Dalton knows, it's who he's already spoken to. William said something low and short that she did not catch. There's a way to counter it, Hale continued. He looked at both of them in turn. A child would settle the question beyond challenge. A child is biological evidence that no amount of testimony about the nature of the arrangement can overcome. The room went very quiet. Rebecca kept her face exactly neutral. I see, she said. William said nothing. She did not look at him. I understand that is not a practical suggestion in the immediate term, Hale said, with the delicacy of a man who had walked into a room he hadn't fully expected. But you should know where the law stands. In the absence of that, the best defense is documented public behavior, witness testimony to the authenticity of the relationship, and moving quickly before Dalton can file. How quickly? William asked. Weeks, Hale said. Not months. They did not talk about what Hale had said on the ride home. They talked about the documents, about the timeline, about which of their acquaintances might be willing to give testimony. They were efficient and practical, and said everything except the thing that was sitting in the middle of the carriage between them, like a third passenger. It was only when they were back at the house, standing in the front hallway, that William stopped and turned to her. I want to apologize, he said. She looked at him. For what? For putting you in a position where a lawyer can sit across a desk and tell you that the value of your presence in this house is contingent on... He stopped. His jaw worked. "That is not what I intended when I came to you." "I know," she said quietly. "You are not—" He started again. "You have never been a mechanism to me. I want to be clear about that." Rebecca looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the parlor at the Beaumont Gala. She thought about the folded paper, and the short, precise nod, and the way he had said, "I don't mind you knowing," in the dark of the carriage. She thought about 10 weeks of careful, deliberate, incremental honesty building between two people who had promised each other nothing but a signature. "I know," she said again, and she meant it differently this time. He looked at her for a moment, the recalibrating look, and then he gave that small nod, the one she had learned to read. And she went upstairs, and she did not think about what Hale had said. She did not think about it for exactly 4 more days. She was standing in her room on a Tuesday morning when she knew. She had been unwell for 6 days. Not dramatically, not the kind of sick that required a doctor, just a low, persistent wrongness that she had attributed to the heat and the stress and the particular misery of worrying about legal proceedings, while simultaneously trying to appear like a woman who had no worries at all. She had waved it away every morning and gone about her day. On Tuesday morning, she stood in her room and counted backward, and stopped counting. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She sat there for a long time. She had not thought about this. She had not allowed herself to think about this, because she and William had— it had only been once, and it had been quiet and careful, and afterward they had both behaved as though it was simply the next logical point in the documented public behavior of a credibly married couple, which was almost certainly what it was. And she had not let herself assign it any more weight than that. She pressed her hand against her stomach. The same hand, the same gesture she had made outside his study in the cold open of everything. But she was not there yet. That was still coming. She did not know yet what she was walking toward. What she felt, sitting on the edge of that bed in the summer heat, was not panic. It came later. What she felt first was something she did not expect. A fierce, sudden, non-negotiable protectiveness that had nothing to do with contracts or clauses or legal maneuvers. Whatever this was, it was hers. She would figure out the rest. She did not tell William immediately. She told herself she needed to be certain first. She needed to see a doctor, needed confirmation, needed solid ground before she stood on it. But the truth was simpler and less defensible than that. She needed time to understand what she felt, before she had to understand what he might feel. And those were 2 separate projects, and she was not ready to do them at the same time. She went to the Tanner social the following Friday, and she smiled at the right people, and held William's arm through the reception room, and answered questions about their plans for the fall, with the easy confidence of a woman who had been doing this for months, and had gotten genuinely good at it. She was, she realized, no longer performing. Somewhere in the last 10 weeks, the performance had become the thing itself. When she took William's arm, she was not thinking about Dalton, or the clause, or what it looked like from across the room. She was just holding his arm because it was there, and it was solid, and she had come to find it, quietly and without announcing it to herself. A reliable thing. That frightened her more than almost anything else. It was at the Tanner social that she heard Crowell's voice for the second time. She recognized it instantly, that particular flatness, the voice that had said, "She won't understand until it's already done." And she went still with her hand on William's arm, and did not let her expression change. "Steady," William said quietly, close to her ear. "I hear him," she said, equally quiet. "Don't look." "I'm not looking." She turned them both slightly, naturally, as though they were simply redirecting toward the refreshments table. and in doing so, she put herself at an angle where she could see, in her peripheral vision, Crowell speaking with a man she didn't recognize near the far wall. "He's talking to someone. Younger man. Dark coat. I don't know him." "Describe him," William said, picking up 2 glasses from the table and handing her one without looking at her directly. She described him in a low, even voice. Height, build, the particular way he was holding his body, slightly turned away from the room in the careful manner of a man who did not want to be observed having this conversation. William was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's Dalton's nephew. He's a licensed notary." Rebecca absorbed this. "They're executing something," she said. "Tonight," William agreed. "Or very soon. Crowell doesn't bring his notary unless the documents are ready to sign." She thought quickly. "Is Hale here?" "He doesn't attend social functions." "Can you get a message to him tonight?" "Yes." "Then do it now," she said. "I'll stay visible." She felt him look at her. "Go," she said pleasantly, smiling at a woman across the room who had looked their way. "I'll be fine. I grew up in rooms like this." He went. She stayed. She moved through the next 40 minutes with the precise, sociable ease of a woman who had nothing on her mind but good company. And she spoke to Mrs. Tanner about her garden, and Mr. Feld about his horses, and she laughed at 2 jokes that weren't especially funny, and she kept Crowell and the nephew in her peripheral vision the entire time. She saw the moment Crowell handed something to the nephew, a folded document. The nephew tucked it inside his coat. Rebecca set down her glass and found the closest door. She caught up with William in the side corridor and told him what she had seen, and they stood together in the quiet, and William's face did the thing it did when he was very angry, and containing it with great precision. "He's filed," William said, "or he's about to." "What does that mean for us?" "It means we have less time than Hale thought." He pressed his hand once, briefly, against his forehead. "It means tomorrow I need to—" He stopped. He looked at her. "It means I need to ask you something I have no right to ask." "Ask," she said. He looked at her for a long moment with those gray eyes. "Would you be willing to speak to the court? Directly, not through Hale. You, in front of a judge, describing this marriage as genuine." The word sat there between them. "As genuine," she repeated. "I know what I'm asking," he said. "I know it put you in a position where you would need to say things that are—" He stopped again. He was not a man who struggled for words, and the struggling itself was more eloquent than anything he might have managed to say. "I know the contract didn't include this." Rebecca looked at him. She thought about the notebook, about the carriage, and the dark, and "I don't mind you knowing." She thought about Tuesday morning, and the fierce, quiet thing that had settled in her chest, that she had not yet named. "William," she said. He looked at her. "I would not have to lie," she said carefully. Something shifted in his face, something complicated and open and very unlike his usual expression. "Rebecca," he said, I'm not making a declaration," she said quickly. "I'm saying that what I would tell a judge about this marriage would be the truth. That's all." He was very still. "All right," he said. His voice was lower than usual. "Thank you." They went back into the reception room. She took his arm. He covered her hand with his briefly. The same signal from the Henderson supper. Well done. But it felt different this time. Slower. Less procedural. And she did not let herself think about why. She told him about the baby 5 days later. She had seen the doctor on Wednesday and had her confirmation. And she spent 2 days deciding how to say it, and in the end, she simply said it. Over dinner. Not dramatically, just, "I need to tell you something." He set down his fork. "All right." "I'm going to have a child," she said. "Your child." I found out this week. I'm certain. The silence was total. William Ashford sat at the end of that long table and looked at her across it, and she watched his face for what felt like a very long time. "Are you well?" he asked. It was the first thing he said. Something moved in her chest. "Yes," she said. "I'm well." He was quiet for another moment. Then he stood up from his end of the table, and he walked the full length of it, and he sat down in the chair directly beside hers, which he had never done before. Dinner was always opposite ends, that was the pattern. And he looked at her from that close distance with an expression she could not fully decode. "I want to be clear about something," he said. She waited. "This changes nothing about what you're entitled to," he said. "The settlement, the arrangement, your choices, none of that is conditional on this. I want you to know that." "I know that," she said softly. "But I also want to be clear." He stopped. He looked down at his hands and then back up at her. "I am not indifferent to this. I want you to know that as well." It was not a declaration. It was William Ashford, so of course it was not a declaration. But it was the most he had ever offered her of the thing underneath the control, and she felt it land with a weight that was disproportionate to the words themselves. "Okay," she said quietly. He stayed in that chair for the rest of dinner. It was 3 days after that conversation that everything came apart. She had not intended to be near his study. She was on her way to the east sitting room, the one that caught the morning light, carrying her notebook and a cup of tea. She heard voices, his voice, and another she recognized, Hale, the attorney. She should have kept walking. She knew that. She stopped. She was not trying to eavesdrop. She told herself that later, over and over. But the door was slightly open, and her own name came through it like a hook, and her feet stopped moving before she could make the decision to move them. "You need to consider the position this puts her in," Hale was saying. "I'm aware of the position," William said. "If Dalton's attorney gets her on the stand and starts questioning the nature of the—" "I said I'm aware of it, Garrett." "Then you're also aware," Hale said carefully, "that the child is not sufficient if the marriage itself is challenged first. The sequence matters. If the annulment petition moves forward before the child can be registered, then it won't move forward," William said. "I'll make sure of it." "How? By calling in what? You don't have enough in the county judge's favor to—" "I have enough." His voice had dropped, and it was the voice he used when a subject was closing. "Rebecca doesn't need to know the details of how I manage it. She needs to be protected from this proceeding, and I intend to ensure that." A pause. Then Hale, quieter. "And after? When this is settled?" Another pause, longer. Long enough that Rebecca's hand had gone still around her cup. Long enough that she had stopped breathing. "She deserves better than what I've given her," William said. His voice was very low. "She came into this honest, and she's stayed honest. And I have not. I have not been what she deserved." A pause. "But that doesn't change what this is." "Which is?" Hale said. And then William said it, quiet and certain, and with the particular finality of a man stating something he has already decided. "I never loved her." 5 words. Rebecca's hand uncurled from around the cup. The tea sloshed close to the edge and did not spill. She stood in the hallway outside that study door, with those 5 words filling her chest like cold water, and every careful, fragile, unnamed thing she had been building quietly in the space between her ribs came undone without a sound. She walked back upstairs. She did not run. She kept her chin exactly where her mother had always told her to keep it. And she went to her room, and she closed the door, and she stood in the middle of it with her hand pressed flat against her stomach, where 6 weeks of secret was still quietly growing, and she thought about what she was going to do next. Because she was not the girl who had stood behind the gardenias at the Beaumont Gala anymore. She was not the woman who had signed a paper in a dim parlor and told herself that love was a luxury she could not afford. She did not know yet exactly who she was, but she knew she would not stand still for this. Not for him, not for Dalton, not for any of it. And whatever came next, she was going to walk into it on her own 2 feet. She packed a bag that night. Not everything, just what was hers before the marriage, what had come into this house in her hands and would leave the same way. 2 dresses, the blue one she had worn to the wedding and the green one from the Henderson supper, because those were the ones that mattered to her, and she was done pretending the things that mattered to her didn't matter. Her mother's letters, the notebook. She folded everything carefully and set the bag near the door, and then sat on the edge of her bed and did not sleep. She had stopped crying somewhere around midnight. Not because the hurt had passed. It hadn't. It was sitting directly behind her sternum, in the place where the warmth had been, pressing against her ribs every time she breathed. But because she had cried herself through to the other side of it. And what was on the other side was something harder and steadier and more useful. She thought about what he had said. Not just the 5 words. All of it. She deserves better than what I've given her. She came into this honest, and she's stayed honest. She had turned those sentences over 100 times in the dark, and they did not square with the 5 words. And that gap between them was the thing she kept stumbling against. She thought about the way he had walked the length of that dinner table and sat beside her. She thought about, "Are you well?" being the first thing out of his mouth. She thought about every careful, deliberate, incremental thing he had done over 3 months that a man who felt nothing would not have bothered to do.
And then she thought, it does not matter what he meant. It matters what he said. And what he said was that she was not loved, and she had a child growing quiet and certain inside her, and she could not, she would not, raise that child in a house built on a sentence like that. She picked up her bag at 5 in the morning and carried it to the door of her room and stood there with her hand on the knob. Then she set the bag down. She went to the desk. She sat. She opened the notebook to a clean page, and she wrote, in her clearest hand, everything she had heard through that door. Every word, the exact sequence, the exact phrasing. And then she wrote below it, in a separate hand, as though she was already writing testimony, what I believed this marriage to be, and what I now understand it is. She wrote that for 2 pages without stopping. When she was done, she read it back once and folded it carefully and put it inside the front cover of the notebook. Then she picked up her bag and went downstairs and found William already in the kitchen. He looked at the bag in her hand. His face went very still. "Rebecca," he said. "I heard you," she said. "Yesterday, outside your study. I heard what you said to Hale." He did not look away. He did not offer a denial or a deflection. He just looked at her with that level gray gaze, and something moved through it that she did not have time to name. "All of it?" he asked. "All of it." He set down his coffee. He was quiet for a moment. Then you know I said you deserve better." "I know you said you never loved me," she said. "The other part doesn't balance that out." "Rebecca, I'm going to my mother's," she said. "I need you to not argue with me about this. I need you to let me go for now and give me time to think clearly, because right now I cannot think clearly in this house." He was very still. "And the court proceeding? Hale has my testimony already, in writing." She lifted the notebook slightly. "Everything I observed,
Everything I documented. It stands regardless of where I am. She looked at him steadily. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm not doing this to damage your case. I'm doing this because I heard 5 words through a door, and I have a right to decide what I do with them. He looked at her for a long moment. She watched him work through something. She could see it, the same controlled internal process she had learned to read over 3 months. And then he gave that nod. I'll have Marcus bring the carriage around, he said. I'll walk, she said. Rebecca, it's 5 in the morning, and you're... He stopped. I'm what? He looked at the bag, at her face, at the hand she had unconsciously pressed against her side. You're not going to walk across the city at 5 in the morning, he said. That is not something I'm willing to agree to. She almost argued. She stopped herself. Fine, she said. The carriage. He turned to go find Marcus, and she stood in the kitchen alone for a moment, and the house was very quiet around her, and she thought, this is the last morning I will stand in this kitchen like this. And the ache of it surprised her. That was the thing she had not accounted for. How much the quiet of this house had become familiar. How much she would miss it. She was still thinking about that when Marcus brought the carriage, and she climbed in, and William stood at the door of the house to watch her go, and she did not look back. She almost looked back. Her mother asked no questions for the first hour. That was one of the things Rebecca had always loved about her. She understood the difference between presence and interrogation, and she had the patience to offer one before the other. She made tea. She sat across from Rebecca at the kitchen table that Rebecca had grown up sitting at. She waited. I think I made a terrible mistake, Rebecca said finally. Her mother looked at her steadily. Which kind? The kind you can walk back, or the kind you have to walk through? Rebecca looked down at the table. I don't know yet. Tell me. She told her. Not everything. She was careful, precise, the way she had been trained, but enough. The clause, the court proceeding, what she had heard through the door. Her mother listened without interrupting, and when Rebecca finished, her mother sat quietly for a moment, turning her cup around in her hands. What do you feel for him? Her mother asked. Rebecca was quiet. Not what you thought you felt, her mother said. Not what you think you're supposed to feel. Right now, this morning, what is it? Rebecca pressed her lips together. I don't know. Yes, you do. Mama, you packed a bag, her mother said, and then you came here instead of going to a hotel, which means some part of you is still deciding. You would have gone to a hotel if you had decided. She set down her cup. So decide. Rebecca looked at her mother, who had held her hands at the kitchen table and said, Your grandmother married your grandfather under worse circumstances and never once regretted it. Her mother, who had said, Don't let him make you small. He didn't make me small, Rebecca said quietly. That's the part I keep coming back to. In 3 months, with everything that was happening and all the reasons he had to, he never once made me feel small. Her mother nodded once. And I heard 5 words, Rebecca said, and they broke something. But everything else, 3 months of everything else. I don't know how to weigh that against 5 words. You don't weigh it, her mother said simply. You ask him what he meant, and then you decide. She did not go back that day, or the next. She needed the distance, not from him specifically, but from the version of herself she had been in that house, the one who had gotten so good at reading his silences that she had almost stopped reading her own. On the second day, a letter arrived. She recognized the handwriting immediately, precise and angular, no unnecessary ornamentation. Rebecca, I am not asking you to come back. I am asking you to hear me out. There are things I said that require correction, not excuse, correction. The distinction matters. If you are willing, I will come to you. You will not be required to return here first. W. She read it 3 times. She put it in the notebook. On the 3rd day, Hale arrived at her mother's door. She brought him in because he was William's attorney and not William himself, and because she could see on his face that he had not come for legal reasons. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, when her mother had left the room, "I owe you an apology." She looked at him. "You said what he asked you not to say," she said, "about a child settling the legal question. He was angry with you about that." Hale blinked. "Yes. And the conversation I overheard." She kept her voice level. "He didn't know I was there." "No," Hale said. "He did not." He folded his hands in his lap. "Mrs. Ashford, I am going to tell you something that is not covered by privilege, because it was said to me by a man who I believe would tell you himself if he knew how." He paused. "What Mr. Ashford said to me in that study, the full context of it, was not what you would have heard from the hallway." Rebecca felt her pulse shift. "Go on." "He said," Hale said carefully, "that he had not loved you when he came to you at that gala. That was the truth he was stating, not the present tense, the past." He held her gaze. "He was telling me that the arrangement had changed, that what he felt now was something he had not planned for and did not know what to do with, and that you deserved better than a man who had taken 3 months to recognize something he should have recognized from the beginning." The room was very quiet. "That's not what I heard," Rebecca said. "No," Hale agreed. 5 words taken out of context rarely sound like what they are. She pressed her hand flat against the table. She breathed. She thought about those 5 words and the gap she had kept stumbling against. The gap between them and every other thing she had observed. And the gap closed, and she understood. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, "instead of him?" Hale looked at her with his precise, patient eyes. "Because he doesn't know I'm here," he said. "And because I made a mistake in that conversation too. I pressed him on things I should have approached differently. And you are—" He stopped. He looked like a man choosing between accurate and kind, and deciding after a moment to try for both. "You are not a mechanism, Mrs. Ashford. You never were. And you should not be making decisions based on a fragment." She sat with that for a long moment. "Dalton filed this morning," Hale said quietly. "I thought you should know." She stood up. "How long before the hearing?" 10 days, possibly less." "Does William know?" "I'm going to him next." "Tell him," she said, "that I'll be at the house by evening." Hale looked at her. "The case needs both of us," she said, "and I have things to say to him that I will not say through a letter or an attorney." She picked up the notebook from the table. "Tell him I said that the distinction matters. He'll understand." He was waiting when she arrived. Not at the door. She could tell he had not wanted to presume, but in the study. And when she came in, he stood up from the desk and did not speak first. "I want to say something before you do," she said. He waited. "I'm angry," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm angry because I heard what I heard and it broke something. And even if the context changes the meaning, the fact that I stood in that hallway and had something break in me, that happened. I'm not going to pretend it didn't." "I know," he said. "And I'm not here because Hale convinced me of anything," she continued. "I'm here because I made a choice, and I need you to understand the difference." "I do," he said. She looked at him. "What did you mean?" He did not ask her what she was referring to. He said, "I meant that when I stood in the parlor at the Beaumont Gala and made you an offer, I did not love you. I did not know you.
I saw a name I could use, and a woman who appeared capable, and I made a calculation. His voice was even, but it was costing him. She could hear it. I meant that I am ashamed of that now, not because the arrangement failed, but because somewhere in the last 3 months, it stopped being an arrangement, and I did not tell you. Because I did not know how. Because I am, he said, with the precision of a man stating a humiliating fact, not good at this. The room held its breath. You are extremely not good at it, she said. Something shifted in his face. Yes. You should have told me. I know. You should have said something, anything. She felt her voice try to crack and held it steady by force of will. I was building something in this house, William. I was building it quietly, and I wasn't naming it because I didn't think you wanted me to. But it was real. And when I heard those words, I thought I had been building it alone. You weren't, he said. His voice had dropped. You were not building it alone. She looked at him across the study, this room she had come into angry on her second morning in the house. This room where she had handed him a notebook full of evidence and watched him recalibrate. And she thought about the carriage in the dark, and I don't mind you knowing, and the dinner table, and the chair beside hers. Then say it properly, she said. Not to Hale, not in a letter. To me. He crossed the room. He stopped close enough that she could see the line of tension in his jaw. The thing underneath the controlled expression that was not controlled at all. I love you, he said. I have been failing to say it clearly for approximately 6 weeks, and I am sorry for the damage that silence did. And I am telling you now, with the full intention of not making you guess at it again. She exhaled. It was not a clean, simple exhale. It was 3 months of wait, and 5 words worth of damage, and 6 weeks of something she had not let herself name, all leaving her at once. That was better, she said. I have some room to improve, he said. You do, she agreed. And then, because it was true, and because her mother had told her not to let anyone make her small, and this was the opposite of that. I love you too. I have been failing to say it clearly for approximately the same amount of time. He looked at her for a moment, and then he reached out and took her hand. Not the way he did it in public, the deliberate, signal-laden gesture, but simply, just her hand in his. There is still the matter of Dalton, he said. There is, she agreed. And there is the matter of the child, and what Hale said about the sequence, and we need to talk about all of that. She looked down at their hands and then back up at him. But not right now. No, he agreed. Not right now. She had been back 4 days when the summons arrived. Not the court summons. That had come and been handled by Hale, the hearing date confirmed. This was different. A letter with Dalton's seal addressed to her directly. Not to William, to her. She opened it at the breakfast table. William watched her read it. What does it say? He asked. She set it down between them. He read it. She watched his expression do the thing she had come to know. The controlled, precise not moving that meant he was more alarmed than he was letting show. He's offering you a settlement, William said. Independent of me. He's offering me money to testify that the marriage was contractual in nature, she corrected. There's a difference. He's trying to buy your testimony. Yes. She picked up her coffee. He thinks I heard something through a door and ran to my mother's house, and now I'm vulnerable to the right offer. She looked at William over the rim of her cup. He is not a very good judge of character. No, William said slowly. He is not. I want to use this, she said. William looked at her. He reached out to me directly, in writing,
with a monetary offer to provide false testimony. She tapped the letter. That is not a man making a legal argument. That is a man attempting to suborn perjury, and he has done it in ink, and my name is on the envelope. She held his gaze. Give this to Hale. He stared at her for a moment. Then he stood up from the table, picked up the letter carefully by the edges, and walked to the door of the kitchen. Hale is going to say you're remarkable, he said, without turning around. Hale is going to say it changes the entire case, she replied. That's what I care about. He paused. He turned just enough to look at her over his shoulder. Both things can be true, he said. And then he was gone, and she sat alone at the breakfast table with her coffee and the morning light and the particular warmth of a woman who has been seen clearly for the first time by someone who is looking directly at her. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday, and on the Monday before it, Dalton made his last move. He came to the house again. Marcus brought his name, and Rebecca and William exchanged a look across the sitting room. Together, William said. Together, she agreed. They received him in the front parlor, side by side, and the shift in Dalton's expression when he saw them together was minute but unmistakable. The recalculation of a man whose strategy has just encountered a variable he did not account for. Mr. Dalton, William said, this is unexpected. I wanted to speak with you both, Dalton said, before tomorrow. His pale eyes moved to Rebecca. Mrs. Ashford, I hope you received my letter. I did, Rebecca said pleasantly. I passed it along to our attorney. He found it very interesting. The color shifted slightly in Dalton's face. Not much. Enough. I think, William said, that we're done here. Dalton stood. He looked between the two of them, and Rebecca saw the exact moment he understood. Not just that he had lost this particular maneuver, but that he had misread the entire board. He had looked at this marriage and seen a mechanism. He had looked at Rebecca and seen a decoration. He had built an entire legal strategy on the assumption that the arrangement was what it had started as, and he had not accounted for the possibility that people change. Good day, Mr. Dalton, Rebecca said. He left. She and William stood in the front parlor and listened to the sound of his carriage pulling away. And then William exhaled. A short, controlled exhale that was the closest she had ever seen him come to fully letting something go. It's not over yet, he said. No, she agreed. Tomorrow is tomorrow. She turned to look at him. But he knows now. And knowing changes how a man fights. She tilted her head slightly. You know that better than most. He looked at her with those gray eyes, and in them she saw the thing she had been watching grow for weeks. The thing that was the opposite of coldness, that had no name when she arrived in this house, and now had one. And it was familiar and certain and entirely hers. How are you? He asked quietly. Not strategically, not procedurally. Tired, she said honestly. Hopeful? She pressed her hand lightly against her side. Ready for tomorrow? He reached out and covered her hand with his. Not the public gesture, not the signal, just the simple covering of one hand over another. And she did not move away. Then we'll be ready together, he said. She looked at him for a moment, this man she had not expected and had come, in spite of everything, to mean by home. Yes, she said. We will. The hearing was set for 9 in the morning, and Rebecca was dressed by 6. She did not pace. She had made a decision somewhere in the night that pacing was the thing a frightened woman did, and she was not frightened. She was prepared, which was a different thing entirely, and she intended to walk into that courtroom carrying the difference between those two things like armor. She sat at the desk in the room that had become hers over 3 months, and read back through the notebook one final time. Every entry, every date, every exact phrase she had documented with the careful precision her father had taught her, and the legal instinct that Hale had confirmed was sharper than he'd expected. She had not slept much. She had thought a great deal. She had thought about the fact that 6 weeks ago she had stood outside a door and had something break in her. And 4 days later, she had come back to this house and chosen to stay. And the choice had been hers, entirely, clearly, without coercion or contract. That mattered. It mattered in the legal sense that Hale had explained carefully over 2 hours the previous afternoon. And it mattered in the deeper sense that had nothing to do with law at all. She closed the notebook. She picked up her gloves. She went downstairs. William was already in the front hallway. He was dressed with the same precise care he always brought to public appearances, and he turned when he heard her on the stairs, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. They had said the important things. There was nothing left to say that the morning couldn't hold in silence. "Hale is meeting us there," he said. "I know. If at any point during the testimony you feel—" "William," she said, "I've been preparing for this since the Hargrove reception." She reached the bottom of the stairs and looked at him directly. "I'm ready." He looked at her for a moment with those gray eyes that she had learned over 3 months and considerable difficulty to read. What she saw in them now was not the controlled, recalibrating expression she had spent the first weeks decoding. It was something simpler and more unguarded and entirely clear. "I know you are," he said, and he offered her his arm, and she took it, and they walked out together. The courtroom was smaller than she expected, and more crowded. Dalton was already there when they arrived, seated at the opposing table with his attorney, and a man she recognized as Crowell, and a second man she did not know. Dalton looked up when they entered, and the pale, assessing eyes moved from William to Rebecca and back. And she read in them the same recalculation she had seen in her front parlor the previous day. The adjustment of a man encountering something he had not fully modeled. She kept her chin where it was supposed to be. She sat beside William and placed the notebook on the table in front of her, and folded her hands on top of it, and waited. Hale took the seat to William's left and leaned in immediately, voice low. "Dalton's attorney filed a motion this morning to exclude your documented evidence on grounds of self-interest. The judge denied it. You'll be permitted to reference specific entries." "Good," Rebecca said quietly. Hale looked at her. "You should know, Dalton's attorney will be aggressive on cross. He'll try to reframe everything you observed as motivated reasoning." "He's welcome to try," she said. William's hand found hers under the table and pressed once. She pressed back. The judge was a man named Avery, old enough to have seen every variation of human behavior in a courtroom, and young enough that he had not yet become cynical about it. He called the proceeding to order with the brisk efficiency of a man who had 12 other things scheduled for the day and intended to manage all of them. Dalton's attorney went first. His name was Proust, and he was the kind of lawyer who treated every sentence like a weapon and sharpened each one carefully before using it. He laid out the blood claim with the precision of long preparation. The grandfather's will, the estate provisions, the legal argument that a contractual marriage could not supersede a direct line of inheritance when the contract itself could be demonstrated. He was very good. Rebecca watched him work and made herself listen to every word, because you needed to understand the shape of the argument aimed at you before you could respond to it effectively. Her father had taught her that too. Then Hale stood up. He did not match Proust's dramatic energy. He never did. He was precise and methodical, and he moved through the counterargument the way a man walks a familiar road in the dark, unhurried, certain, without needing to look at his feet.
He presented the timeline. He presented the documented public behavior. He presented Dalton's letter to Rebecca, which he had already submitted as Exhibit 3, and he watched the judge's face change when that letter was placed in front of him. Rebecca watched Dalton from her peripheral vision. His face did not move, but his hands did. They pressed flat against the table in a controlled, deliberate way that she recognized as the same thing William did when he was containing something. "Mr. Dalton," the judge said, "this letter was sent to Mrs. Ashford directly, not through counsel?" "My client," Proust started. "I'm asking Mr. Dalton," Avery said. Dalton looked at the judge. "Yes," he said. "Offering a financial settlement in exchange for specific testimony." A pause. "A settlement," Dalton said. "In recognition of—" "You can characterize it however you'd like," Avery said, with the pleasant tone of a man who has already formed an opinion and is simply completing the formality. "I'll characterize it myself," Proust objected. Avery overruled. Rebecca exhaled slowly through her nose and kept her face perfectly composed. She was called to testify 30 minutes into the proceeding. She had expected nerves. She had prepared for them, had rehearsed the particular breathing her father used before a difficult meeting. What she felt instead, walking to the witness chair, was something closer to clarity. Every week of the last 3 months sharpened itself to a point inside her. And the point was simple. She knew the truth of what this marriage was, and the truth did not require performance. Hale asked the questions. She answered them straight and without decoration. "Mrs. Ashford, when did you become aware of the blood claim provision in the estate documents?" "The morning after I disclosed to my husband what I had overheard at the Hargrove reception." "And how did you come to be aware of the Hargrove conversation?" "I was standing near the refreshments table. 2 men were speaking behind a potted arrangement to my left. I recognized the voice of one of them, a man named Crowell, from an earlier event where I had overheard him speaking about my husband's inheritance with a second individual." "And you documented these conversations?" "Yes, starting the night of the Hargrove reception. I have records of 9 separate incidents relevant to Dalton's legal strategy, including dates, locations, the names of individuals present, and the substance of what was said." She heard Proust shift in his chair. She did not look at him. "Mrs. Ashford," Hale said, and his voice changed slightly, carefully, the way a man takes a step he has measured first. "I want to ask you about the nature of your marriage. Not the legal documents. The nature." She looked at him steadily. "All right. Is there anything you would characterize as genuine in your relationship with your husband?" Proust was on his feet. "Objection. Leading." "I'll rephrase," Hale said pleasantly. "Mrs. Ashford, how would you describe your marriage?" She looked at Hale. She felt William behind her at the table, not looking at her. She knew he wasn't looking at her, because he understood that looking at her right now would appear staged. And she thought about everything she was not allowed to simplify, and everything she was not willing to reduce. "It began as a practical arrangement," she said. "We were honest about that with each other. No one in this room is going to believe otherwise, because I'm not going to tell them otherwise." She heard Proust settle back into his chair, satisfied. She continued, "But the question of how a marriage begins and the question of what it becomes are 2 different questions. I came into this house 3 months ago, and what I found was a man who kept his word, who was honest with me when honesty cost him something, who sat beside me when I needed steadiness and gave me room when I needed to think. The marriage changed. That is my testimony." The room was quiet. "And would you characterize your current feeling for your husband as—" Hale paused.
As genuine? She looked at the judge, not at Hale, not at Dalton, at Avery, who was watching her with a careful, neutral attention of a man trying to determine where the truth lives. I would not describe it, she said clearly, as anything other than love. And I'm prepared to say that in any room, to any person, for however long it needs to be said. Proust's cross-examination lasted 45 minutes and accomplished nothing he had intended it to accomplish. He was skilled. She gave him that. He tried reframing, misdirection, the gentle implication that a woman in her family's financial position had ample motivation to characterize her marriage in whatever way preserved her settlement. She answered every question the same way, directly, specifically, without defensiveness. And she used the notebook twice, reading back exact dates and exact phrases that undercut his narrative before he could finish building it. At one point, he leaned forward and said, "Mrs. Ashford, you've presented a great deal of documented material here today. Isn't it possible that someone instructed you to keep these records? That you were guided in what to observe and how to record it?" She looked at him steadily. "My father taught me to keep written records of anything that might later be disputed," she said. "He was a businessman. He understood that memory is fallible and documentation is not. No one instructed me. I made the decision myself, the night of the Hargrove reception, before I had told my husband what I overheard, before I had spoken to Mr. Hale, before anyone had suggested it would be useful." She held Proust's gaze. "I did it because I was raised to pay attention. I suggest that was a mistake no one in your client's position accounted for." Proust looked at her for a moment. He said, "No further questions," and sat down. The judge called a recess. Rebecca walked back to the table and sat down, and William turned to her and said nothing. And the nothing he said contained the entirety of everything he felt, and she understood it completely. "You were right," Hale said quietly, mostly to himself. "About what?" Rebecca asked. "About the letter," he said. "Exhibit 3 just changed the shape of this entire proceeding." He straightened his papers. "Dalton attempting to suborn your testimony privately, in writing, while simultaneously pursuing a court claim? That's not aggressive lawyering. That's desperation. And the judge knows what desperation looks like." William was looking at Dalton's table across the room. "He's speaking to Proust." Hale glanced over. "He's cutting his losses," he said. "Proust will file for continuance or withdrawal. He's too careful to let this go to full judgment when the letter's already in evidence." As if on cue, Proust stood and approached the bench during the recess, and the judge leaned down, and there was a brief, inaudible exchange. Rebecca watched Dalton's face during it. He was looking at her, not at William, at her. And what she read in his expression now was not the warm, weaponized pleasantness of the man who had come to her parlor and said, "She won't understand until it's already done." It was the particular flatness of a man who has understood, finally and completely, that he was wrong about what he was dealing with. She held his gaze. She did not look away. She let him see that she was still keeping records. He looked away first. The withdrawal came 10 minutes after the recess ended. Proust stood and addressed the court in the formal, smooth language of a man performing a maneuver he had done before and intended to do again. The petition was being withdrawn pending new information. The blood claim was not being abandoned, but was being tabled for review. He used 7 different phrases that all meant the same thing. His client had lost today, and they were retreating before the loss became a rout. Judge Avery accepted the withdrawal with a neutral expression of a man who had seen this before. He issued a brief statement confirming the legitimacy of the Ashford estate documents and directed the court record to include Exhibit 3 with a notation regarding the nature of its contents. And that was it. It was over. Rebecca sat in her chair for a moment after the gavel came down, and let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Not the legal victory, that was Hale's work as much as anything, but the thing she had built, sentence by sentence, choice by choice, over 3 months, in a house that had started as a transaction and ended as something entirely else. That had held. Under the most direct pressure it could have been put under, it had held, because it was real. William leaned close. "Rebecca." She turned to look at him. "Thank you," he said. Just that. Quietly, without the controlled containment, without the gray-eyed precision. Just a man saying something true. "You're welcome," she said. Hale shook both their hands on the courthouse steps and looked at Rebecca with the expression of a man reassessing a category he thought he understood. "The documented records," he said. "I want you to know, that was the case. Not the testimony about the nature of the marriage, though that was compelling. The records, the provable chain of Dalton's interference, starting before the marriage, running through the Hargrove reception, ending in a letter that no competent attorney should have let his client send." He shook his head slightly. "That was you." "My father," she said, "was a better teacher than he knew." Hale nodded once and left, and she and William stood together on the courthouse steps in the summer heat. And the city moved around them the way it always did, the way it had been doing since before either of them had walked into that parlor and signed their names to a piece of paper that had meant one thing then and meant something entirely else now. "What do we do now?" William asked. She thought about it, genuinely. "We go home," she said. "And then I want to write to my mother. And then I want to eat something, because I was too nervous this morning to eat breakfast, and I am now very aware of that." He looked at her. "You didn't appear nervous." "I was terrified," she said pleasantly. "I'm very good at not appearing to be." He was quiet for a moment. That's an unsettling thing to know about one's wife. "You have time to get used to it," she said. The almost smile that was more than almost now. "I do," he said. And she heard in those 2 words the same thing she had heard in the carriage in the dark when he said, "I don't mind you knowing." The thing that was larger than its container, the thing that had taken him considerable effort to learn how to let out. Her mother came to dinner that evening. Rebecca had written the letter in the carriage on the way home, which was not the most dignified method of correspondence, but was efficient, and sent it with Marcus, and her mother arrived at 6 with a jar of preserves she had made, and an expression that said she already knew most of it from the way Rebecca had written. William received her with the precise, formal courtesy he applied to every new situation, and her mother received him with the patient, measuring attention of a woman who had been watching people her entire life and had no intention of stopping now. During dinner, somewhere between the 2nd course and the 3rd, her mother said, "Mr. Ashford, my daughter tells me you kept your word." William looked at her. "Yes, ma'am." "She tells me you were honest with her." "I tried to be," he said. "I was not always successful. I am working on it." Her mother looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that Rebecca recognized as the full assessment, the one that went all the way down. Then she picked up her fork. "Good," she said simply. And that was that. Under the table, William's hand found Rebecca's, and she felt him exhale. The closest he came to a laugh, sometimes. And she pressed his hand once, and did not let go. The weeks after the hearing were quiet in the way that follows a storm. Dalton sent no further communication. Crowell disappeared from the social circuit. Hargrove, the next time Rebecca encountered him at a function, greeted her with a slightly too warm friendliness of a man attempting to retroactively position himself on the correct side of something. She smiled at him and asked about his harvest and gave him nothing else. Hale sent a final letter in late August, confirming that the estate documents had been formalized, the inheritance secured, and no further challenge was expected in the foreseeable future. Rebecca filed the letter at the back of the notebook. She had started a second notebook by then. It contained different things, not legal documentation, smaller observations. The way William said her name now, without the careful containment that had been there in the beginning. The fact that he had begun coming to the kitchen in the mornings before either of them had other obligations. Not because breakfast required two people, but because the mornings were, apparently, something he wanted to share. The way he had placed his hand against her stomach one night, gently, without making a declaration of it, and the way she had covered his hand with hers, and the way neither of them had needed to say anything out loud. The second notebook was not evidence. It was a record of a different kind. The kind her father had not taught her, but that she had figured out on her own. The record of a life being built, carefully and honestly, and with the full knowledge of how much work it required, between two people who had chosen it. It was a Sunday morning in September when William found the second notebook. She had left it on the kitchen table, not deliberately, not as an invitation, simply forgotten in the way of things that feel safe. He picked it up without opening it, looked at her across the kitchen with that gray gaze. "Is this another one?" he asked. "Different kind," she said. He turned it over in his hands. "May I?" She considered. "The entry from the 3rd of August," she said. "Start there." He opened it. He found the page. He read it, and she watched his face do something she had not seen it do before. Not the controlled expression, not the almost smile, but something fully open and entirely unguarded. And it lasted only a moment before he schooled it back. But she had seen it, and she kept it. He closed the notebook and set it back on the table. He looked at her. "You documented the morning I made you coffee," he said. "You made it wrong," she said. It was remarkable. It was not that wrong. It was profoundly wrong, she said. "I drank it anyway." He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and stopped very close to her and looked at her with the full, unguarded version of the gray eyes, the one she had been given more and more of as the weeks went on and the containment came down, layer by layer, and she thought, this is the man he is when he is not afraid of being seen. This is the one she had been waiting for since the parlor at the Beaumont Gala, since the dark carriage and the 5 words and the courtroom and every difficult, incremental, honest step between. "I love you," he said, not the way he had said it in the study, the careful, costly declaration. Simply, like a fact he had gotten used to stating. "I love you too," she said. Same tone, same simplicity. He pressed his forehead briefly against hers, and she felt him breathe. And she thought about a girl who had stood behind the gardenias at a summer gala and believed that love was a luxury she could not afford. She had been wrong about that. She had been wrong about a great many things, and right about others. And the ones she had been right about, the notebook, the carriage, the courthouse steps, the choice to walk back through that door, had built her here, to this kitchen, to this man, to this quiet September morning where nothing was performed, and nothing was provisional, and nothing needed to be documented, because she intended to live it for a very long time. Their daughter was born in the spring, on a morning that came in soft and warm off the river, and she had William's gray eyes and Rebecca's stubborn chin, and no patience whatsoever for being kept waiting, which Rebecca took as a sign of excellent character. William held her for the first time with the same precise, careful attention he brought to everything that mattered, and Rebecca watched his face from across the room and saw the moment it happened, the full, unguarded, permanent kind of open. And she did not document it in either notebook. Some things did not need a record. Some things simply were and went on being, and did not require proof.
That morning, in that room, with the spring light coming in and the river smell on the air, and a child between them who was already expressing very strong opinions about the world, Rebecca Ashford understood what her grandmother had understood before her, and what her mother had been trying to tell her at that kitchen table. That love built from necessity and honesty, and the daily choice to stay, is not a lesser thing than love built from ease. It is, in fact, the strongest thing there is, and she had chosen it, and it had chosen her back. And that was the whole of the story, and it was enough.